Alright, so welcome everybody. Ford, aka Moo Time Dweller here. We are playing Modern Magic Online. Going back to Modern, I got a pretty fun one lined up tonight. We're doing Mono Green Goblin Charbelcher. It's only got 7 forests in the whole deck. And I know, it's bold. Some people might have seen this deck before. But I changed it up a little bit, and what I've always been told with a deck that's, not tier 1 or tier 2, or just considered bad, quote unquote, make it good. So I put a little bit of money into it. I've tested a good bit with it. I've gotten a little lucky with some new cards that came out. So we'll get down and explain it a little bit. So a few cards to look out for. When you're playing, with this deck, you don't want to play against Stony Silence. For obvious reasons, this shuts down your artifact. Well, actually, we'll get to that later. Okay, so this deck only has 7 forests, so it means there's a lot of ramp, a lot of spells in the deck. Search your library for basic lands or forests, or reveal cards from the top of your library until you get a land. There's one spell, Recross the Past, that does that. So, Ancient Stirrings is a card that's very popular in Tron and a lot of other decks in Modern that have green. So you get to look at the top 5 cards of your library, you reveal a colorless card from among them and put them in your hand. So this helps us immensely. You can get a Forest, you can get a Goblin Charbelcher, you can get a Wormcoil Engine, or you can get a Renegade Map, which is kind of one of our lower level search for a land cards, but if you get it off of Ancient Stirrings, it's not the worst thing in the world. Also, you can get Damping Sphere off of it after sideboarding. Next up is Arbor Elf. So, Arbor Elf combines very well with Utopia Sprawl. That's pretty much the only reason that Arbor Elf is in the deck. When you play it on turn 1, a lot of times people think that you're playing green-red Panza. So that's a very slight advantage when it comes to when you're playing in a competitive match or something like that, whether in paper or in online. So that's really the flimsy part of the deck, I would say. Not really flimsy, but I guess flexible. If you wanted to change out some of the cards, I would think Arbor Elf and Utopia Sprawl would be pretty easy to change out if you wanted to get more ramp or a different way to ramp up more. But to me, this is the most efficient way to do it. Otherwise, you have some off the beaten path spells that people aren't really going to notice right off the bat. So this just searches for a basic land, and you put it into your hand. But if a creature died this turn, say if somebody killed your Arbor Elf, or if you sacrifice your Sakura Tribe Elder, the land comes into play straight up. So, that's pretty fantastic. So then next up is an old school card, Fog. Can't really beat Fog. Traverse the Ulvenweld is another one. It just searches for a basic land in the beginning of the game. But if, say, you're playing against Jund or for some other reason have 4 different types of cards in your hand, you can go find any land, which is, a forest. It has to be a forest for us. Or you can find a creature and put it in your hand. So, next up is Utopia Sprawl. We've already explained that with Arbor Elf. It's a good card, and it really ramps you up fast, but it's just kind of taking up space, if that makes any sense. Renegade Map, already explained that with Ancient Stirrings, kind of one of our lower level spells that go find a land. Haze of Pollen is one of the newer fog cards. Has a fog effect, but it also cycles. So if you're, just not drawing anything or just happen to not need Haze of Pollen, it's easy to cycle it during the end of your opponent's turn or something, maybe even during your turn if you're desperate enough. This is a card that I sideboarded originally when I first was testing with this deck. Heroic Intervention is a very good card. This stops, say if you're playing against the green-red Panza deck, which is a lot of land destruction, you can protect your land, which has Utopia Sprawl on it. And that can be actually kind of crippling if we get hit, with a land with Utopia Sprawl on it, and all we had is an Arbor Elf out, and then that one land with the Utopia Sprawl, then we could be way, way, way behind. So Heroic Intervention really helps with that, and it also helps with when we get our win conditions out, and if they try to Path to Exile or, destroy the Charbelcher or something like that, it's easy to just, intervene. So Sakura Tribuilder is a card that I just put in the deck recently. Until recently, I've had in Rampant Growth, which is just a spell version of this card. For different reasons with a different spell later on. The reason I had it in there was for Nissa's Pilgrimage, so that I could get Spell Mastery a lot easier and faster. This is basically Cultivate, but if you have Spell Mastery, you can go get 3 forests instead. Little bit better. So Recross the Paths, I have 2 of these. This can be very, very good, and at worst will get you 1 untapped free land into play. The downsides to this card, you kind of reveal your deck, so it's not really ideal to play it in game 1 if you haven't revealed Charbelcher, or if your opponent really doesn't know what's going on. It's kind of good to keep them in the dark with this deck, and if you play this on game 1, turn 2 or something like that, you might reveal a Charbelcher, and it'll kind of show your battle plans. This deck is not very well known. I mean, people know of it, and people, may not be surprised by it if you go to your local store with it, or if you come online with it. You may not, get very many surprised people, but it's also just way fringe deck. It's also not very expensive. The only really expensive card is Wormcoil Engine, backup card. So, I put Dismember in here also. I just got 2 Dismembers. Just in case, if you run into Storm or something like that, where they win on turn 3, pretty much guaranteed a lot of times, you can get a Dismember and take care of it. Hopefully. Chancellor of the Tangle is a card that we used in the Progenitus deck. If you watch those videos that I had, I think that was the first set of videos I released. Chancellor of the Tangle is very good. You get to reveal it in the opening hand, so this is actually a better card in this deck than it is in the Progenitus deck, in my opinion. This allows me to take no land hands. So I can take these in my opening hand, and if I have at least one, and say if I have at least, one of these 1 casting cost spells that search for a land, I'm fine. I can go find a land, and then go cast another spell, like an Arbor Elf or Utopia Sprawl or even a Renegade map, and still have the ability to have 2 lands or even 3, if not more, and then just go off from there. The big idea with this deck is when you have your opening hand, you need to ask yourself, do I have a lot of action in this hand? You're going to need to have several search spells in your hand. This is not really great to have in the opening hand. Maybe one of, but if you get both of them in the opening hand, you might need to think about mulliganing. This is a difficult deck to play because of the opening hand situation and because of the 7 land situation. It's difficult to get used to, and I don't know. It's also difficult playstyle because you don't really interact with the opponent. So it's tough to get into that playstyle and that mindset, and then it's even tougher to get out of that mindset when you play a different deck or a different format or something like that, and you have to start thinking more about what's going on and what's in the opponent's hand. So if I wasn't clear about what Goblin Charbelcher does, you play it for 4, you activate it for 3, reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a land, and then this artifact deals damage to them or a creature that they control equal to the number of cards that you revealed. So ideally, with this deck, you have all 7 of your lands out, and you never, have to worry about it. You just win that way. The second part of this card does say if the revealed card was a mountain, then it deals double the damage instead. We don't really worry about that. I've tried Stomping Ground. I've also tried a mountain in the deck. You draw it too often when you need a forest, and you have it in your opening hand, saying it's your only opening land. Very difficult to play with that. And then most of the search spells only look for a basic land. So Stomping Ground was difficult to go find if I wanted to go get it. Granted, a lot of times it would make it the last one, but then it would, be like 3 cards down and I'd only do 6 damage. So I found out that just 7 forests is better for me. Some other players actually still do use Stomping Ground and Mountain, and some other decks splash white and have Temple Gardens in the deck for other different reasons. Through my research, at least. So that's the main deck of this here. Sideboard is pretty straight at forward. There are 4 cards to deal with artifacts and enchantments. 2 Nature's Claims. Don't really care about whether or not they gain 4 life, so... because Goblin Charbelcher, you're doing upwards of 30 to 40 damage at a time, so you can deal with that. The other 2 artifact and enchantment cards are Fracturing Gust. This is really, really good for Lantern Control, Affinity, Boggles. Can actually be used against Burn. If they have an Eidolon out, you can gain 2 life randomly. I haven't done that, or haven't really had the chance to do that, but it's a play. Otherwise, 4 Damping Spheres, brand new card. Shuts down Tron, Storm, some other decks that I can't really think of right now. But had a really good experience with this card so far. I mean, when a strong card is printed like this and weak decks like this needed something like it, oh yeah, 4 of them are going in the sideboard. This is where I put a little bit of money in the deck. I got Leyline of Sanctity. In a lot of my testing, I had problems with duress type cards. Inquisition of Kozilek, Thoughtseize, anything like that. I don't think I ran into Cabal Therapy. That's a legacy. Anything that made me discard a card. And, like Kolaghan's Command, it would destroy my Charbelcher and make me discard a card. So it's a difficult card to deal with. Or just approach to deal with. Like Jund, with Liliana would make me sacrifice a creature. Now Liliana's ability does get around Leyline of Sanctity, the first one. It says each player discards a card. So need to be aware of that. But this is a card that has saved me against Burn also, because I've had an issue with life gain and adding life gain into the deck. I thought about adding some other card that was named Nissa's, I think it was Nissa's Renewal, and you gain 7 life for 6 mana, and you get to go search your library for 3 forests. But by that time, when I was casting it, I already had my lands out and already had what I needed out, and I didn't need to gain 7 life. I was so far behind anyway. So Leyline has actually really solved a problem with Burn also. So the only life gain I have is Wormcoil Engine. And it's kind of difficult when you're losing on turn 4 and 5 to get Wormcoil Engine out and actually deal 6 damage with it, either blocking or attacking. Even if you played on turn 3, turn 4 you're dying and you're not, doing any damage. So there are a lot of bad matchups with this deck. So I did my best to try and hose them as best as possible. Like like I was saying, Jund and Burn are difficult, and Affinity and Storm are very difficult, and Boggles and all the other decks that I mentioned with the artifacts and enchantments. Affinity is difficult, things like that. Lantern Control I haven't had too much experience with, but I would imagine Fracturing Gust takes care of it pretty well. Maybe not completely, but does a good job. This has been one of my favorite cards in the whole deck. Gaea's Revenge. It takes out any kind of control deck or anything that's path to exiling your creatures, especially Wormcoil Engine. So this is an 8/5 for 7 with haste that can't be countered, and it can't be targeted by non-green spells or abilities from non-green sources. So there are very few non-green sources, or actually, there are very few green sources, that destroy creatures or do enough damage to creatures to kill them, especially if they don't have flying. So this has been a huge beat stick sometimes. I've had the opponent attack out, and I'll have the 5 or 6 lands and then the Arbor Elf or something like that, and I'll just slam Gaea's Revenge and attack for 8 and win the game that way. I've done that when I just slam Gaea's Revenge, get 8 through, and then actually had the Charbelcher with only 3 lands on the battlefield. Still had 4 lands in my deck. Activated the Charbelcher. Bam. Got it. So, yeah. It's fun. Hope y'all enjoyed this deck tech. Just another disclaimer, this is not a very competitive deck. I tried to make it as competitive as possible. So, I hope the matches work out well. And I will see you later. Thank you for your time.